Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts, HB and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Multiverse, a podcast where we dissect media through the lens of mental health and healing. I am Heather, or HB, here with my co-host, LB. And
we don't use our government names here. What are you doing?
And today's topic of interest is the Disney/Pixar movie Inside Out, which I discovered when we decided to do this episode is not one of LB's favorite movies. She does not like it.
It's not. I know. It seems like it'd be right up my alley, but I don't know. We'll get into that.
I'm truly, genuinely surprised. And I wonder if our discussion today will change that.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, that's fine too. This will be one of the first times in MHM history where HB is the one who loves something. And I'm not as extreme as you in the terms of like, have seen it every day and am so shocked, like that kind of thing. It's more just like, I genuinely really enjoyed this movie when I saw it and am surprised that it is not, because you love all of the other ones. Like, I'm just surprised that it's not one of the ones that you love, right? So
yeah. And as you know, when we watched this for the purposes of this podcast, I started to develop some theories as to maybe why. And, this season 2 is all about self-reflection animation, or self-reflective animation, excuse me. And this movie definitely made me reflect. So
yeah, there you go. But for those of you who don't know the plot of Inside Out, also don't listen to this episode if you've never seen it, maybe. Lots of spoilers ahead. But anyway, the plot is Pixar's Inside Out takes place in the mind of an 11-year-old girl named Riley. The plot of the movie follows her emotions and what's going on inside of her head as some big changes happen in her life. Joy, her emotion Joy, just wants Riley to be happy, but when the emotion sadness starts to affect some of Riley's core memories, what happens when joy and sadness struggle to coexist and the other emotions have to take over?
Dun, dun, dun.
Meow, meow, meow. Yes. And so the thing I find the most interesting about this movie is that I feel like Pixar movies are always very emotional and very reflective and have that like sort of heaviness to them that cause you to feel something. So I thought that it was interesting that they chose to go in a direction that really conceptualized that. And as you have said in a meme, is like, what if feelings had feelings? So
yeah, no, definitely.
So the movie came out in June of 2015. I was 25 and I saw it in theaters. Did you see it in theaters?
I did not.
Why not? Okay, Miss IFC why?
That's a good question. So in 2015, I was about to be 20. In June, I would have been 19. I was in college. I think it's just when I just didn't have time. My first time seeing the movie was in 2016, almost over a year later for sure. I had just moved out and I made a friend at this lifeguarding job. And I was living in the city, and I went over to her house for dinner, and she was like, "Hey, have you heard of this movie?" And she got it on DVD, and she was like, "Hey, have you heard of this movie Inside Out?" And I was like, "Not really." And she's like, "Oh my God, I think you would love it. It made me cry." And I was like, "Okay." And we watched it, and she was like, the Bing Bong scene, spoilers, was like making her sob. And I don't know if it's because she like warned me ahead of time, but like I felt nothing. And I feel really bad saying that. I feel really like I have no heart, because like
you are a heartless person. If you did not cry during the Bing Bong scene, you are a heartless person, and I don't care. I don't care, LB. No excuses.
Does it make up for the fact that I cried within the first 5 minutes of Up? Like I was sobbing.
No, everyone cries in the first 5 minutes of Up. Everyone.
Not my boyfriend.
Come on.
Anyway, that's beside the point. He's not here right now.
I know. I'm yelling and it's fine, but like this is also obviously hyperbole, but
I'm noticing a lot of strong emotions, particularly anger. Should we dive into that a little more?
I don't think so. I think this is about you, and you're diverting the conversation towards me.
I'm projecting right now.
Yeah.
Trying to deflect. Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it's also because like maybe at the time I was so disconnected from my emotions because like I said, I had just moved out of like my abusive childhood home and I was like developing my sense of self. So some of the theories that I have with my first time watching it was it could be that because my friend like overhyped it, maybe like I was expecting to have like a huge emotional reaction and I didn't. It could be that I was jealous of Riley because she had parents who loved and cared about her and wanted her to express her feelings, even though, as we'll get into, the movie kind of starts out with them really relying on her to be this happy go lucky girl and like they didn't really need to worry about her. So that could have caused some things. But one of her quote unquote islands of personality is family. Like that's a big part of her personality in her life. And maybe I couldn't relate. And sadness is so freaking annoying in this movie. So maybe it was just like a combination of a lot of these things just like really turned me off from the movie. So yeah, like this one I've only seen twice.
I think I didn't find sadness annoying. I think that I think Joy finds her annoying and we're supposed to find her annoying through the lens of Joy.
Yeah.
But my other question is, did anything change watching it this time or were you still heartless?
Okay. I want to clarify some things. First of all, when I first watched the movie, I thought sadness was annoying. The second time I watched it, I realized she's not. And yes, it is Joy being annoyed with sadness that makes the viewers think sadness is annoying, but then also plays on the whole idea that like being sad is bad or like, you know, toxic positivity and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The second time I watched it,
which we will get into later.
Yes. The second time I watched it, I did tear up at the Bing Bong thing just because at that time, and I don't remember when this was, it was on Disney Plus, and I decided to rewatch it to be like, I'll give it another chance. And I did. I did tear up because at that point I had been deeper into my healing journey. I was definitely more connected with my feelings and my emotions and my authentic self. And then, you know, around that time also I was like quote unquote officially an adult. And so the idea of like kind of losing your childhood was a big theme in my life. And I was like, whoa, oh my God. But then I like finished the movie and I was like, okay, that was fine. And then I like just moved on. I don't know. And so this is the third time that I've watched it. And I, for different reasons, had to fast forward through the Bing Bong scene just because.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Grief reasons.
Yeah. Grief reasons. So take back the heartless thing because your girl has a heart.
I know. I hope that the people listening to this like understand that this is hyperbole.
Yes,
they're not like, Heather, you're a bitch.
No, Heather understands. We get each other, and she's not attacking me. I don't feel attacked. So anyone
I'm not attacking you either, listeners, if you did not cry during the Big Box scene. I'm just saying you might have a little bit of inner emotional work to do. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Anyway,
you might not be heartless, but you might be unemotional or emotionally unavailable. Check in.
There we go. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Even my roommate was crying, so thank you. Anyway, so for me, my first experience, this is deeply, deeply personal, and I'm not going to go into the details of it on the podcast. If anyone is friends with me, like, and knows what happened in the summer of 2015, not 2015, yes, 2015, like, my life changed in a big way, and it's not even that big of a deal, but it's one of those things that's like, it's something that you go through. It's like a rite of passage, or like this, like,
yeah,
I am an adult. I don't know. Just like, it's just like one of those, it's like a big life change, like a big internal, like, stepping stone in life, I think. And it's all a concept. And I don't want to get into all the details of that because I'd have to start talking about it. But anyway, something big changed in my life in 2015 that summer. And my best friend, to help me deal with the emotions of that, we did a double feature at the movies, and she and I had both worked at a movie theater for years. I grew up from the age of 16 until I graduated from college. At 22, I worked at a movie theater. And so going to the movies is like, it is a special experience for me, basically. It like means a lot to me. And so we did a double feature, and the two movies we watched to help me get through this like giant emotional stepping stone in life was Inside Out and then Magic Mike, the first Magic Mike movie. Like that's those are the two movies. So for those people who like put like Barbenheimer together and are now putting like Wicked and Moana together and did the like Saw and Paw Patrol, we did Inside Out and Magic Mike. So whatever you want to make that combo, there we go.
Inside Mike.
Yes, inside Mike. There we go. But anyway, so that was like, it was a very, very emotional weekend for me. And I think that like that heightened like I was in a heightened state of emotion. So that might be why I have a deeper connection to this movie and had such a visceral emotional reaction to this movie, because I was already in a heightened state of emotion. So all of the hyperbole is also me projecting that like, how can you not cry? Because I only ever cry when I see this movie, you know? So
did you cry rewatching it for the purposes of this podcast?
I sure as hell did. Yeah. I didn't think I was going to. I was prepared for the Bing Bong scene. What I was not prepared for was at the end when Riley's memories get covered with sadness, but it's a happy moment. I was like,
oh yeah,
I wasn't expecting to cry at that part. But anyway, I think that one of the reasons I love this movie, which also might be a reason why you don't, a theory for me, is that I related to Joy a lot as a people pleaser and as a toxic positive person, as someone recovering, going through all of that.
Yeah.
I was a little triggered, for lack of a better word, like little T triggered, I guess, because I was recognizing the things in Joy that I disliked about myself, about pushing emotions away, and about like, yeah, that sort of like people pleasy, not letting yourself feel. And I think also recognizing it in other people in my life, like sometimes the way that my parents dealt with problems was not dealing with them at all, and that kind of thing. And so that was a little bit, I think, another reason why it was a heightened emotion for me, because it was like, I really like Joy, but also I hate her, you know? It's very
yeah. What is that the theory that the things you are annoyed by in other people is often a reflection of ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's why I was annoyed with sadness, because when I watched it, I was like super deep into my depression and I was like, eh. Why?
Well, that's also interesting too. And I have to, let's like, as we go further into this, we're going to get a little deeper right away, because I'm going to follow your coattails of that thought.
Yeah.
Do you see what was happening with Riley as depression? Like when her islands start falling away and when her that control panel starts turning black. Would you call that like signs of depression?
I would say so. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting though that she's, and this is a note I definitely wanted to highlight, was that she's falling into a depressive state, even if we don't want to like diagnose it as depression, without sadness being at the control panel. And I think that's really important to note, that like depression isn't just feeling sad, right? It is a little bit of disgust. A lot of it is fear. A lot of it is anger. Like she's super angry at her parents, you know? So I do like that, and how they kind of navigated representing depression as not just sadness. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I also got a lot of like sort of dissociation, especially when like all of the emotions are like, I can't do this anymore. And it's like she kind of just dissociates
down.
And
yeah,
isn't
she's
really
like in shutdown.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. You know, which is a trauma response.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, she's definitely going through a really big change. And and at the same time, I think when we're 11, that's when we kind of like quote unquote come online, and we're like more aware of ourselves. And even at that age, emotions are very, very complicated. And a note I made was it's interesting that in her control panel, it's just like one console and the five of them kind of fighting for the driver's seat. But in her parents, all of the emotions have a seat at the table. And so and then at the end of the movie, they do like it's a bigger control panel. They each get their own thing. And so I did like that transformation and the way that's depicted is, I mean, I think it's a very accurate representation of how anyone who is getting in touch with their emotions, it's not about letting one, such as joy, be in the driver's seat, but about letting all of them kind of play a different role and have equal say in whatever. It doesn't have to be like all or nothing, because I think that's a cognitive distortion a lot of us can fall into. Before we go deeper with that, I do want, for those who aren't familiar, kind of talk about the different emotions and characters. There are 5 main, I guess, quote unquote, characters or emotions that are in Riley's head. And there's joy. And she's the first one that's introduced right when Riley is born. And there's only one button and it makes Riley laugh. And Joy loves that. And then sadness. And she's the second one that shows up. And that's when Riley, as a baby, starts crying. And immediately Joy is like, you're making her do a thing that's not happy. I don't like you, to sadness. And then disgust. And I don't remember, but then fear. And what I really, really, really like about the way that fear is introduced is because Joy is kind of like our narrator. She's really the one that we're following. She says, that's fear. He's really good at keeping Riley safe. And I was like, I love that though. Because I so much of our human brains, and it's not a bad thing, but it is driven by fear. Like that is how we have survived as a species, being cautious, being wary, and then trying to figure out what is safe. But anyway, so then anger comes in, and I really like the way that she introduces anger too, because Joy says anger cares about things being fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that too. So like Joy is sort of like the leader. And what I find interesting about Joy is that she did have like an immediate dislike for sadness. I almost said hatred, but that's pretty strong. Like an immediate dislike for sadness. But it's interesting to me that she works so well with the other emotions. And I think it's because the other emotions don't affect Riley the same way that sadness does, because Joy has put a more positive spin on how they affect her. Because
and I think
like the
they're
way
more like quote unquote short-term emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like very situational, whereas I feel like Joy sees herself and sadness as these like potential long-term things. And so Joy is in that all or nothing state of like, if Riley isn't happy, she's going to be sad. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's true. Yeah, because even when the other emotions touch core memories, they don't change. It's only when sadness touches a core memory that they change. So
yeah,
and I think it is because those emotions are a little bit more like immediate. But I also just thought it was interesting. Like there's a moment. So as everyone knows, or maybe you don't, I don't know, but they're making a sequel to this movie and they're introducing anxiety, which I think is very interesting. Because isn't fear just anxiety like a little bit more intense? Like that to me is an interesting choice of emotion to add. If I were remaking Inside Out, I would have made the next emotion shame.
Ooh.
And that only came up for me watching this because I was thinking about, because watching this through the lens of my brain, I'm thinking about like why people get into fitness, why people have negative body image, why this, why that. And a lot of that is because of shame.
Yeah.
And we do develop shame at a young age. So
yes.
I am surprised that shame is not one of the emotions that they included. But again, I only thought of it because looking through the lens for this. But when I was thinking about that, it was when they're going to the first day of school in the new city, right, in San Francisco. And Joy looks at Fear and she's like, this is going to be a great day. You give me a list of all worst case scenarios. And he's like, don't worry, I'm on it. And he's like writing out and then gives this like whole stack of papers of like, what are the worst case scenarios, right? And it's like, that's anxiety though, no? I guess to me, they're like they're intertwined. I mean, all emotions, I suppose, are intertwined at the point of this movie, but.
Yeah, I did make a note of that too. Like, why anxiety and why not depression as like personified emotion? I guess maybe because, well, I don't think anxiety is an emotion either. Because I was going to say depression's not really an emotion.
Yeah.
I don't think anxiety is an emotion. Yeah, no, that's a really good. Okay.
It should have been shame. Okay. Anyway.
No, I agree because like shame is a huge driving factor in not just anxiety, but depression too. You know, that feeling of like not being good enough and feeling a little hopeless and worthless and things like that. And it's interesting too because I feel like, would you agree that she's experiencing a lot of shame like when she starts crying on her first day of school in front of everybody, and when she is running away and then realizes like, oh no, I don't want to do this, and comes home?
Yeah.
I wonder,
all of that is shame.
I wonder if though the reason why, and I'm just spitballing here talking out loud, because there's a difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt says I did a bad thing, and shame is I am a bad thing. And I wonder if it's because her parents are so supportive and loving and have provided a safe space for her to be open and honest about things, that they are kind of like the roadblock between guilt snowballing into shame, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe
it does, but her parents like weren't there for the moment in school. And I feel like a lot of like, of course, parents can have a big effect on shame too, depending on how you were raised. But like outside of that home environment, a lot of that can still affect you, even if you do have a good home environment.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
Like,
that's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. It's just something to think about. Disney, Pixar.
Disney, Pixar. Think about that. Side note, I love and hate the San Francisco representation. I think it's funny that we did this episode right after Big Hero 6, because that's like San Francisco, so it's like a mashup of Tokyo and San Francisco, but this is like legit San Francisco. What irks me is that because the Golden Gate Bridge is so much more famous than the Bay Bridge, it throws off the geography. So when they come into San Francisco, they're driving off the Golden Gate Bridge, but then somehow end up at the ferry building, which is like so far away from the bridge. And then they like go through, I don't know, they end up at some point on Lombard Street, which, fun fact, now you can't drive down anymore. So I still have never seen it and I've never driven down it, whatever. So that's that was like my only note about San Francisco.
I just want to interrupt. It's just really cute that you care so much. And I because like every movie that's set in New York will show someone going down a subway station. And that train never actually goes to where they end up.
I knew you would relate to that. Yeah.
How hard is it to look up a map and be like, this train goes to this station? Like, it's not that hard, but like filming in New York, I guess they're like, well, let's go down to the F train and
everything just gets so condensed. It's so funny. Like Central Park and the Empire State Building are like right there. Statue of Liberty is right behind you.
Yeah. No, that's funny. Yeah, it's what were we talking about before?
Shame, anxiety.
Oh yeah. So the sequel comes out in June.
Oh, okay.
Maybe they will introduce shame. Like maybe they only brought up anxiety because anxiety is hot right now.
Anxiety is a fad right now. That's what's in.
That's what I'm just saying. Like, I feel like anxiety and ADHD are like what every content creator is talking about right now. So it makes sense that they were like, let's pick up on this.
Well, then I hope they use it as an opportunity to kind of break down not like what anxiety is, as if what anxiety is being shown as on social media is necessarily wrong. But I do think we can, it's kind of like the same thing between guilt and shame. I think a lot of people might talk about guilt and just be like, oh my God, like I'm so ashamed of myself or whatever, or like I'm so anxious, when really it's like I'm just nervous. Or, I kind of hope that they talk about the different ways anxiety can kind of show up. And I don't want to necessarily say that anxiety is on a spectrum. I do think people with anxiety can have different levels of functioning, but I hope that they dispel because like Riley plays hockey, right? So maybe it's like she might be nervous about a game, but I don't want that to become or like maybe it is nerves that spirals into anxiety because like she's getting a lot of pressure on her performance. That could be really cool, but I don't want it to perpetuate the I mean, with social media is fantastic and it's great, but it's kind of one of those things where now everything is a trauma response. And I just hope it doesn't fall into that kind of I don't want to say propaganda, but I can't think of a different word, but you know what I mean.
It's just like a trap. It's like a little trap because also it's like the whole everyone has ADHD now, which is like not a discussion we have to have right now, but it does make sense because our brains can only take in so much information and we're taking in so much more than they can actually hold.
Yes.
So it does feel like everyone has ADHD because our brains can't hold all the information we take in every day.
Yeah, we're constantly multitasking and blah blah blah. But in addition,
so it's like, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like with people talking about anxiety publicly, it's great for people to be able to identify the feeling. But you're right when it comes to like just being nervous or just like feeling anxious and having anxiety are like not the same thing too. Like you can feel anxious without being like having that like sort of and like without
diagnosis
having, like, the more, for lack of a better word, extreme things that come along with anxiety, like anxiety attacks, panic attacks, like those kinds of things.
The bodily visceral reactions that you can have. Yeah. No, I agree. I was just gonna say so in addition to these 5 personified emotions in Riley's brain, another key aspect or 2 key aspects that kind of make up Riley and her personality are literally these things called islands of personality. You'll have to remind me. I think there are 4 or 5 of them when we meet Riley because Joy kind of introduces us to them. There's silly, goofy Funland.
Goofball Island.
Goofball Island. That's much more concise than whatever I just said. Hockey Island. Friendship, family,
and trust.
And so over the course of the movie, as things go on, all of those islands start to crumble. And that's when Riley kind of ends up in shutdown mode. And then another key aspect of her are these core memories. So there's these core memories that Joy is very, very proud of because they're like happy memories. And what kind of kicks off this movie is that as they're, I guess, looking at these core memories, each make up one of the islands of personality, sadness touches them. So it's Riley talking about her time in Michigan. Where does she come from? Minnesota.
Minnesota.
It's her first day of school. The teacher's like, we have a new student. Introduce yourself. And she's talking about where she's from. And so Joy's like, ooh, let's tell them about how much fun we had in Minnesota. And so she pulls up this core memory. I think of her and her family skating on the ice. And as the memory is progressing, sadness touches it. And Riley starts crying in front of the entire class. And Joy gets really upset and then kind of like overcompensates and tries to make Riley happy again. But I guess, I don't know, does the sadness go away on that memory? I don't remember.
No. Once sadness touches them, they don't go away. Like once it's been completely touched. But yeah, Joy kind of tries to keep the other core memories from sadness. And then one of the tubes that sucks the not necessary memories down to long term ends up sucking all the core memories plus joy plus sadness away.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And that's why and then I guess because Joy isn't in the driver's seat, or not even just because of that, but there are things. Riley's going through a lot of change externally and internally. So over the course of the movie, all of those islands of personality crumble, and that like raises the stakes on things because she starts to like lie to her family. She gets annoyed with her best friend and things like that. But speaking of the islands of personality, I have a question for you, Heather, and the listeners. What do you think are your islands of personality?
Yeah, so I was like at first struggling to think about this because as we've discovered with the movie, I think that islands of personality can change over time. And like when I was 11, my islands of personality were probably similar, but not the same as what they would be right now. But when I was thinking about it while watching the movie, I was like, oh, are these our values? Like our core values? And I think that if I look at it through the lens of my core values, it's a lot easier. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what my core values are. So like, so creativity is definitely would be one of my core values. Fun, which I think goes under Goofball Island completely. So fun is one of my core values. Health, and you know, when I was younger, health was not one of my core values, so that would not have been in my islands of personality. That's something that developed once I became a fitness professional. I was like, yeah, I really value my health and longevity and life, you know. Friends and family, I can kind of loop into one. I don't think they need to be separate because I consider my friends family.
Yeah.
Community, which could also count as friends, but I really like community is building community, having community. Yeah. And then there's another one. What is it? Diversity. There we go.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
But that's one of my core values. I don't know how that would translate to a pillar of personality, but inclusivity, maybe that one. Inclusivity.
Yeah. I like that. Oh, that's cute. I'm trying to imagine what those little islands would look like in your brain.
Right? Like, I guess inclusivity and community could also kind of go together, but regardless, there's the like community and inclusivity where everyone's like, come on, it's a party. We're all together. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's cute. Like everyone is welcome. I mean, you know, just like everyone's welcome on this podcast. No, that's cute.
Exactly.
It's funny. I asked that question and I actually didn't think about it for myself. But I think, like you said, I do think a lot of the quote unquote islands of personality are just can be your core beliefs, which is why I think it's, in addition to getting in touch with your emotions, it's really important to realign with your values and like your why, you know? And if anyone wants help or wants support in doing that, I actually do have a workbook called Liberating Beliefs, and I can put it in the show notes. So I have a worksheet called Liberating Beliefs, and the little subtitle is Replacing Limiting Beliefs with Positive Core Values. I know that sounds very toxic positivity, but I swear it's not. It really is just like letting your core beliefs kind of become the compass of your life versus maybe some of the cognitive distortions or limiting beliefs that society or other external factors have said should be your life's compass. And so this workbook will be available for patrons only. So if you're like, what is a patron? We have a Patreon where you can get bonus and additional content such as this and bloopers.
Okay.
Yay.
I love it.
But anyway, so I am looking at my worksheet because I did do this obviously myself while I was making it. And I think some of the core ones for me are definitely authenticity, especially as someone who is a recovering people pleaser and perfectionist who felt a lot of pressure to chameleon herself to be liked and to belong and to be accepted. It's taken a lot of work for me to learn about my authentic self, but then also encourage other people to be authentic. Compassion definitely is one for me. I think compassion and kindness might be, I don't know, just like you said with family and friends, it might be one and the same, but I think it's important for me because I didn't have a lot of compassion and understanding growing up. So it's really important for me to give that to myself and to others. Same thing, family and friends. I'm not super close with my like family of origin, but my friends are my family, and chosen family is like really, really important to me. So any kind of media with chosen family is just like my bread and butter. Love it.
We both talk about it so much on this podcast.
So much.
If that wasn't obvious to you, yeah.
That's not clear. I don't know what you're doing here. No, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say like, growth, just because, you know, we've been on a healing journey and we talk a lot about like growing and changing and evolving and how that's like important. And I guess with that comes like some open-mindedness, maybe, which then I guess could also be inclusivity. Yeah, fun, creativity. I guess animals. I was gonna say I feel like animals definitely make up a big chunk of my personality, like my own, and then because I've worked in the pet food industry for a couple years now, so that's really important to me.
I like Animal Island.
Animal Island, yeah. And it's just gonna be a bunch of cute animals coexisting in a utopia. And I think kind of like Riley's Island of Trust, I think mine would be like justice or fairness or something. And that's like my Libra coming out. Maybe like balance, I guess, because as someone who was treated unfairly, I think it's important that I was gonna say justice be served, but that sounds a little extreme, and I don't mean that like the people who wronged me should be punished, but I just think that, you know, people should be treated fairly,
Uh,
equitably. Yeah. Anyway,
yes, I agree. That's a good
I
one.
think that was a really long answer to that question, but anyway. And as we see in the movie, like even though her islands kind of crumble, they either come back or there are just more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like her core memories are what help build her islands of personality. And as you get older, you develop more core memories,
Mhm.
and some of the older ones will not be as important anymore or not be as foundational. And they move on to long-term memory and
And
and then
then
sometimes
get
we forget them.
forgotten. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
I do like that depiction, speaking of, about like I love the physical depiction of memories in this movie, because not that that's how I would have ever pictured memories at all, but it is really interesting to think about like how we store memories and how some memories are lost, and comedically how like you'll remember a jingle from your childhood that you haven't heard in years just come back because it was so catchy, right? Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But one thing it brought up for me, and if you weren't done, we can go back to you. But one thing it brought up for me is how like I don't remember a lot of my childhood, and which I also know is like a traumatic response. And well, it was interesting to me because like obviously this movie was not focusing on that,
Hmm.
but the way I visualized my own childhood was like, oh, my brain, what was happening in my brain was protecting me. So I forgot about these things. And it's not to say that I had a horrible childhood by any means. And I think a lot of people forget parts of their childhood too. But and I have fond memories of moments in my childhood as well, but there's a lot that I forget. And like so I just kind of like that depiction of it as like a form of protection in a way, and that I've got these like little people in my brain trying to keep me safe. They're like, oh, Heather doesn't need this memory, let's put it away, like
Yeah, and no, that's such a point, and that's such an important point that even if it feels like our brain isn't always working in our favor, depending on, you know, our responses and our past experiences, at the end of the day, our brain and our body, like the brain's number one function. Oh, wait, hang on. I love that you said this because when I was in a group therapy program and then with my coaching training, and then I took another course because I love learning about the brain's number one function is to keep us safe. It's not about making us happy. And I think that is just like a really important reframe when we think about our brain and how we might be coping or as we're healing and trying to better understand ourselves. And I think that's definitely a journey Joy goes on too. And I love that one of the critical moments for Joy is she's looking at the core memories. And I don't remember exactly what Sadness says, but she reminds Joy that like, yeah, while the core memory, the thing that Riley might be remembering or what you're remembering is when she was happy, but right before that she was really sad. And so she
Mhm.
can like rewind in the memory, and I guess Riley missed the winning shot of the game and was really sad and down on herself, but then her family came in and cheered her up, and then her friends came in and cheered her up, and they like celebrated her because she did a really good job even if they didn't win. And I really I like that. I did like that.
Yeah. I do think that that's like a beautiful critical moment of the film and the whole plot of the movie. So if we go back to the beginning, when Joy introduces Sadness, she goes, I'm not really sure what Sadness does. And I was like, that's the whole plot of this dang movie, is
Yeah.
Joy figuring out what Sadness does. And her having that realization that all emotions belong when she
Yes.
has included every other emotion except for sadness, right? And she rewinds it and is sort of like, oh, there's space for every emotion to exist. And I think that that's like a really important message of the film, is that like memories can carry multiple emotions. It's what
Mhm.
we talk about on this podcast all the time. It's the both and, right? And it's like you can look back at something fondly and be like, that was both joyful and also incredibly sad,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
And it's similar with grief. It's similar with like past relationships. It's similar when you're going through something like maybe it is a move or like changing jobs, like big changes. That's it. Like big changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not just big changes where multiple emotions can coexist, but it's just interesting to see that transformation from the beginning of the movie when every core memory was gold and shined bright like joy. And at the end of the movie, every core memory had multiple colors in it because
Yeah.
she was finally allowing every emotion to have space in Riley's core memories. Um, and it was just cool to hear that reflected. And I'm sure that I felt this way the first time I saw it too, because of the heightened state of emotion I was in then. But it's just cool to realize, like, looking back on what has happened to me, I'm allowed to look back on those memories and feel joy and feel sadness and feel fear and disgust and shame and anger and all of the other emotions that come along with it, right? Like, and grief and, you know, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like this that critical moment of her doing the rewind in the emotion is like, wow, yeah, they can all belong.
Yeah. It all belongs. It all belongs. That's like something we talk about a lot, the both and it all belongs. And like my therapist once said, when we try to hide or push away the parts of ourselves, those parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily quote unquote like Joy was trying to push away and suppress sadness, one, it can have negative effects because it can rebound and show up in different ways. And they're still a part of ourselves. And we're continuing that cycle when we try to filter ourselves, hide things away to make other people happy, to make ourselves happy. I do think it's interesting too that when Joy is trying to suppress sadness, the other emotions, quote unquote, show up more. Like anger definitely takes a driver's seat, and fear and disgust, but mainly anger. And I think we've talked about this in a different episode about how anger is typically like the secondary emotion, you know?
Mhm.
So I thought that was pretty clever. Yeah, as we've been going through this episode, I noticed myself saying, like, yeah, I like that part a lot. I like the part a lot. But I think I like our conversation more than I like the movie. I don't
Okay.
know why, but we'll see. We still have some other things to talk about.
Yeah, I want to go back to talking about like the whole plot of the movie is like what is sadness's purpose?
Yeah.
And there is a moment when Bing Bong is sad that his rocket, is that what they called it? His little
Yeah.
rocket got put down into the, I don't remember what
The
they call it.
forgetting.
Yeah, the space where things get forgotten. I don't remember what it's called. I
Yeah.
just watched this movie, but whatever. And Joy is trying to distract him and is making faces at him and trying to tickle him and being
Yes,
like,
I know what scene you're
"Ah."
talking about. I love this scene.
and and he's just like he's not responding to Joy because he's sad. And so sadness sits down next to him and is like, I'm really sorry that your rocket fell down into the forgotten place. And I'm sure that it must have been really important to you. And it's like, that was sort of like a moment to realize that like sadness allows like other space to be held, right? Like it's like a
Yeah.
holding of space, which is really beautiful. And it comes up again at the end, like when her parents are talking to her and she's just like letting herself be sad, and like they're letting her be sad, and then they're all sad together and they start bringing
Yeah.
up their memories of the I miss it too, you know, like that. It's like honesty
It's
at the same time.
validating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like I think Joy is trying to suppress it so that they can move forward because they still have things to do. They can't dwell on it, you know, but it doesn't spark or spur any action. He's still really sad. And then after sadness kind of sits with him and talks to him about it, he says, I'm okay now. And he gets up and
Yeah.
they move forward. And Joy's like, how did you do that? And sadness is like, he was sad, so I listened. And I
Yeah.
did write that part down because I was like, that is how you help people feel seen and heard. It's not like, yeah, I see that you're sad, but okay, let's let's do something to get you out of it. Let's distract you. And that's not always what people need. And I don't want to sound like extreme or all or nothing, but oftentimes I don't think that's what anyone needs. To be seen and heard is to kind of validate and acknowledge and accept that that's happening in the moment, and then letting them decide how they want to move forward, right? Like Sadness didn't say anything. She was just like, yeah, I hear you and that sucks and I'm sorry. And he's like, thanks. Okay, I'm okay. Let's now I'm okay. Let's do this thing.
Yeah, it's almost like advocating for like actually feeling your emotions, because a lot of us do, like especially in today's society. Again, going the whole plot of this movie saying that like sadness is bad. You're not allowed to be sad. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to do all of these things. And actually letting yourself be sad allows you to process the emotion, which makes it easier to move forward from. So it's like sadness sitting with Bing Bong, or Riley's parents sitting with Riley, allows her to process what she is actually feeling, rather than Joy just pushing a button and being like, happy now,
Yeah.
So
like, oh, we're happy. Okay, moving on. Yeah, exactly. I just saw one of my notes that, to your question about like the shutdown that we're seeing with Riley, is that depression. And I made a note and I said, I wonder why a little emotion, personified emotion thing didn't appear like anxiety is apparently going to in the sequel. And now that we've been talking about it, I wonder if it's because depression can come with that shutdown, even with people who are high functioning, quote unquote. I wonder if it's because depression is kind of like I don't want to say the absence of emotion, but in the context of this, I hope you understand what I mean. If depression is like the absence of, anxiety is like the other side of that spectrum, like
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people struggle with both. Like I am one of those people who struggle with both. And so like it's not, at first when I learned about these concepts, less abstract, right?
Yeah.
I was like, how can I both be anxious and also depressed? Because I do feel like in abstract, depression is like taking all emotion out, and anxiety is like too much emotion, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It's just
but
like heightened.
I think there is space for that both and like the way that I see depression, and I think it can manifest differently in different people, but the way that I
Totally.
see depression is more like a blanket, or like a heavy weight, or like a sensor. It's sort of like a filter through which I walk
Yeah.
through life.
Yeah.
It's not an emotion. It's not even a feeling. It's 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 a filter in a
Yeah.
way. So it's that's sort of like how I describe it. And anxiety is more like, I think it's really well depicted in the TV show Big Mouth. They depict anxiety as a mosquito. And so
Mhm.
like I think that's a really great depiction of anxiety, is this mosquito that's like, hey, this is gonna go wrong, and then this is gonna happen, and that's gonna happen, and it's like that, and you're just like, go away, go, what are you doing? Leave me
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
Whereas like depression, and I think depression in Big Mouth is depicted as a giant cat that sits on your chest. So like
Mm.
I think that those are very good, accurate depictions of depression and anxiety, because like depression is like a heavy weight, or like I keep describing like a filter through which
Yeah.
I sort of look and walk through life, and then anxiety comes in and is like, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And having both is
Um,
like hearing the mosquito and not being able to shoo it away.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I get what you're saying, is like they're both a bit abstract, but when you take the abstract away from it, like I do think it does feel like depression is like nothing and anxiety is too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so too.
So
And
I
again,
get that.
these are such complicated and abstract things that obviously have to be like super distilled down for a children's movie. So I am curious again to see how anxiety will play out.
So I didn't really get any sort of sense of like body image in this movie. I think the depiction of sadness, I know that there's a lot of plus size cosplayers who really like to cosplay as her, because she is sort of depicted, even though she is small, she's in like a little bit of a more round body.
Yeah.
But I I don't love that it's like she's the negative emotion, right? Like that's the negative one. However, because she is the one who ends up saving the day, she is the real hero of the movie. So
Mhm.
take with that what you will. But in terms of like Riley, she is only 11. So I guess that is kind of young to have any sort of body image issues yet. But I will take it back to that like shame not being an emotion. And I do think that like shame and probably a little bit of disgust would have that like hand, if that were something that were to be explored.
Yeah.
I think that those two emotions would go hand in hand and sort of like maybe have an image of like, you know, and I'm glad it wasn't in the movie, but I'm just sort of like seeing how it would play out if it were an emotion that they explored in the movie.
Well, the next movie that comes out, she's 15, I think. She's a teenager. And so that might be something they, especially with anxiety. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do like, so like I explained when I said my islands of personality, like one of mine is health. I like that one of Riley's is hockey, even though hockey for her is like a hobby and a sport. It's also something that's really keeping her active. And I like that it's something that her parents, you know, something we've talked about in this podcast over and over again is like giving something for a child to do to excel at. And that's one of the things that they do with hockey for her. And so I think that it's cool that that's like one of her core pillars of personality is like, I'm hockey. I have a whole hockey island. Like I love hockey. I love playing hockey. This is like my active thing. It's my hobby. It's my sport. And like for me, when I was 11, it would have probably been dancing, I would say. Because I loved soccer when I was little, but I was not good at it. So I'm trying to think of like,
and not be good at it.
I
Right?
know. I'm like, would it have, I may have had a soccer island, but I also did a lot of dance. I really love dancing and I did dance competitions when I was younger and stuff too. And so like, I think maybe, yeah, those would have been like my more sporty active islands. Now it's like, it's just like overall health and wellness and following wherever I want to go with that. Like all of those things included soccer, dance, fitness, whatever. But yeah, so I love that Hockey Island is one of her core pillars. And that's really all I have on like fitness, body image sort of stuff. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about a healing journey in this, so I don't think I need to really distill it down. But I do kind of want to, now that we've had this conversation, have developed some more, or this is kind of like validated a lot of the theories I have as to why I didn't really like this movie, or it just didn't click. So when I say I don't like this movie, it just doesn't click with me, and it's not one that I rewatch like I do Elemental or Turning Red or something else. Like Heather said, I'm not watching this one every day for a week straight. So right after I watched the movie, I was kind of reflecting as to why, because I do feel like it should be, you know, even though I'm not going to force myself to like love or like, yeah, it's a quote unquote, I feel like I should like this movie, but it just, I don't know. I think the humor and a lot of it fell flat for me. But something you said, Heather, reminded me of this. I think I was triggered. I think I was actually so triggered by Joy and her unrelenting pursuit for positivity and happiness all the time, because it reminds me of like when my parents would dismiss my feelings, or my pastors or my teachers, and they would just be like, you know, everything happens for a reason, or look at the bright side, or, you know, how some people will be like, you should be grateful for your trauma because now look at how strong you are. And it's like, no. And so I think, because like I said, at the time I saw the movie, I had been coming out of like a traumatic childhood home, and so seeing this actually, and maybe this is where I started dissociating and shutting down the first time I watched the movie, because I was like, whoa, this is too relatable. Like it, you know, we've talked about how I relate so deeply to Elemental, and we're going to talk about Turning Red soon, but like that level of relatability is tolerable for my nervous system, but maybe this one pushes me out of my comfort zone. And so I think this movie just triggers me. And that's something I'm working currently through. And especially now that we've talked about it. And I think actually this episode has helped me process a lot of things, because at the end of the day, the movie is about how sadness isn't a bad thing. Positivity can be toxic. And it's about finding a balance for all of it. Because when we pendulate between one extreme to the other, that's when we can get anxiety. That's when depression happens, or that's just when we're not feeling regulated. That's not when we're in our window of tolerance. So, yeah, I think so. I think it's just that a lot of other Pixar movies have, I was going to say they have a happy ending. This one does have a happy ending, but I think the movie those movies are more of a sense of comfort, and this one is slightly triggering. So I think that's currently my theory. If there are any psychologists or therapists listening to this episode and you want to explore my brain further, I am happy to
Oh my God.
talk about it. Wouldn't it be
That's
so
so
fun
funny.
though if like our brain could just figure itself out like that? Like it would be so nice if there were little emotions and little people in our brain trying to work things out. Because when I think about my brain, I'm just imagining that scene from SpongeBob when he's like setting everything on fire and throwing everything out, and then he forgets what his name is, and they're like, "What's our name? What's our name?" And it's all the little
Yeah.
SpongeBobs running around in circles, and everything's on fire, and they're like, "We don't know."
Oh, or just like at the very end of this movie when she hands the water bottle to the guy, to the kid, the boy, and his brain is like, girl, it's a girl talking to his girl. And he's just like,
I did really like at the end of the movie all of the different, we get to see inside the minds of all of these different people and animals too, and how dogs are very like attentive and yeah, they're just very energetic. And this isn't anti-cat propaganda, but the cats are a little more aloof and they're like, nah, nah, nah.
Yeah, and whichever cat happens to be playing with the control panel is the one that's in charge. So
yeah, I mean, it's accurate, so I can't complain.
I do think that cats have mood swings, so I can understand. Like when a cat just is like sitting and then runs across the room, I'm like, okay.
Absolutely. One of the cats accidentally pushed a button, like the little cat in their brain accidentally pushed a button. They're like, zoomies.
Before we wrap up, which emotion as depicted in the movie is your favorite?
That's a good question. I really like anger and disgust. I think they're yeah, I think they're just well depicted. Again, like we talked about how anger is kind of the secondary emotion, and disgust characterization and design is just really cute. So I really like her.
Yeah. I have thought about cosplaying Disgust. And if I do, I have another green character to cosplay. So.
There you go. It's not like you'd have to go out of your way for like green paint or a wig. So
yeah. Although I would get a new one for her because her hair is very different from She-Hulk's hair. It kind of like goes out.
Has more of that like windswept bob kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have a short She-Hulk wig though I might be able to use. I just have to style it so that it's got like the ends go flip out. But yeah, I would agree. I think Disgust is my favorite. I also like how Disgust is not just like ew gross. It's more of a like, oh, those girls are the cool girls. We have to like pretend we don't like things in front of them. Like that kind of thing too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Disgust is also somehow the cool one.
She's like that. Oh my gosh. I was going to say detached, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for. But anyway, at the end of the day, I'm glad this movie exists because it helps give children something to point to. You know, I know when this movie came out, a lot of, especially like behavioral therapists or people who work with children were really grateful because it was a lot easier to like communicate with children. It just really distills a very complicated thing that we haven't had a lot of child specific media or resources, I think. So I do appreciate this movie in that aspect. I do have notes.
Yeah, I as someone who works with kids, I also like this movie for that reason because well, first of all, the depiction at the beginning of like toddler behavior with like going from disgust to anger really quickly is like so accurate, like as someone who nannies for a toddler. And the toddler that I nanny for is in a phase where if I try to feed him yogurt, he will not eat it. He will only eat if he's feeding himself the yogurt. So there's and defiance or like whatever that might be. And
angst.
But yeah, but also as someone who like nannies for older children too, like well, any age, right? Like I have been lucky to work with parents who are very much about helping children identify their emotions because that's not something I ever had or recognized growing up. Like I think a lot of my upbringing and a lot of the childcare that I did in Ohio before moving to New York was about mitigating a child's emotion and placating and like just trying to get them to stop crying or get them to stop being angry or you know like that was sort of like how I was taught. When I moved here, I think it's just a different culture here, a different sort of, and I think I also moved here 11 years ago, so society has evolved, but there were families that I was nannying for where their disciplinary style or their way of like when a child throws a tantrum or when this happens, like the way that they taught me to care for their child was like, instead of disciplining him right away, ask him why he's upset, or like ask him what he's feeling. Ask this question first. If he's crying, let him cry. If this is happening, and so the kids I nanny for now even like an 11-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy, like they have very, very big emotions. And one thing that their parents are very big on are about letting their kids feel emotions. If they run into the bedroom screaming and slam the door, of course, that's like not okay. But we're going to give them space to feel angry first and then go in and be like, hey, can we talk now? We ready to talk? You know, like that kind of thing. So yeah, so I think that's all important. I also wanted to make a note that we probably should have made at the beginning of the podcast, that neither you or I are mental health professionals. We are mental health advocates. And so everything that we're talking about in this is very surface level and also based on our own experiences and what we have learned. But that if you are seeking more help, that you should seek that from a professional, because that is not us. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that note.
Yes, because we can help you in other ways. We both have our own businesses, mine obviously being fitness and yours being like inner child healing and all of that kind of stuff. And as a trauma-informed coach, but not a mental health professional, right?
Exactly. Yes, there is definitely a difference. But we don't have time to go into all of that. But if you are curious, I have resources on my website that might be helpful. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think when I first watched the movie, it was definitely like a 5 out of 10 for me. The second time, 5.5. But I think our conversation today shot it up to like a 7. So, yeah.
All right. I would probably give it like a 7 too, or like an 8. I am surprised there are moments that you didn't find funny. I think Richard Kind as Bing Bong, I think Bing Bong is like meant to be an idiot and so annoying, but like his voice actor Richard Kind just like brings such like a genuine like,
yeah,
wow, I'm really dumb, like to the character, you know. But anyway, yeah,
Bing Bong dumb. I found him a little endearing, but I mean, he's a young child's imaginary friend. So it makes. I mean, he cries candy. Like you can't.
Yeah,
there's only so much you can do with a character like that.
You gotta love him.
Yeah. No, I definitely had to fast forward that scene because even just hearing the audio of like "Take her to the moon" for me. Oh, I sobbed.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for listening. All emotions belong, which I think is like the theme of this movie. Even sadness, let yourself feel the things that you're feeling. And thank you for listening. And of course, we have our Patreon, which also includes a Discord where you can continue conversations like this if you want to talk to other patrons or even LB or I when we pop in about what you took away from the episode. And we would love to hear what your islands of personality are, what you would consider your islands of personality to be, and also what your favorite emotion was depicted in this movie. Yeah. Maybe not your favorite. My favorite emotion is joy. But anyway, yes. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebin_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.